Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something we all know too well. Fear. That tight feeling in your chest when the lights go out, when you're alone with your thoughts, when the dark corners of your mind start to whisper. You probably won't survive this one. No, seriously. Fear is one of the most primal, universal feelings we have, and it's something we've all had to wrestle with. Whether it's fear of the unknown, fear of being abandoned, or just that little voice that tells you you're not enough, we all know what it's like to feel utterly alone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you listening from tonight? Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always cool to know where my listeners are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Fear has a funny way of making us feel like we're entirely on our own. When we're afraid, especially in the quiet of the night, it can seem like we're just one tiny speck in a massive, indifferent universe. But let's start this journey with a simple truth. You're not alone. Sounds like a cliche, right? Something you'd expect to hear from a self-help guru in the middle of a motivational video. But I promise there's more to it than just a feel-good line. Take a moment and think back to times you felt isolated, like fear was your only companion. You might think about that night when a sudden thunderstorm kept you awake, or the first time you walked into a room full of strangers, your heart pounding in your chest. Your mind races, doesn't it? You're searching for comfort, for someone to say it's okay. And yet, when the fear is at its peak, it often feels like you're in it alone. You might even find yourself praying in those moments, or at the very least, wishing that someone or something was with you. But here's where it gets interesting. History's most fearful moments, the dark chapters of human existence, are filled with people who also face this same feeling. Soldiers trembling before a battle, kings who questioned their authority, common folk who feared the end of their world. They too felt that crushing solitude. Yet throughout these times, a constant thread has woven its way through the pages of history, the belief in God's presence. Now I know what you're thinking. That's all well and good for them. But what about me? Fair question. But hear me out. God's assurance doesn't just stay in the past, it reaches into the present. Whether or not you're religious, or even whether or not you believe in any sort of higher power, the very act of believing that someone, something is looking out for you can shift your entire perspective when fear rears its ugly head. Think of it this way. You're standing in the darkness, unsure of what's ahead. You're alone, maybe even surrounded by people, but still feel that gnawing emptiness. And then, just as you start to lose hope, something shifts. Maybe it's a word of comfort from a friend. Maybe it's a sudden sense of calm you can't explain. The idea that you're not alone, that something greater is with you, can make all the difference, honestly. This belief can be a blanket for your soul, soothing the chills that fear leaves behind. And you're not alone in this belief. From ancient texts to modern-day experiences, people have felt this connection during moments of fear. Take the Old Testament, for instance. One of the most famous stories is that of the Israelites, who faced fear daily, whether during their 40 years of wandering in the desert or when they stood on the edge of the Red Sea, knowing they had no way to escape Pharaoh's army. Imagine their terror. Yet, in those terrifying moments, they felt something bigger than themselves. Something that guided them, something that promised they were not abandoned. You see, fear doesn't always disappear the moment you acknowledge it. You don't stop feeling scared just because you've asked for comfort, but that comfort changes you. It opens a door to understanding that even when everything seems out of control, something bigger is walking alongside you. Historians still argue whether this presence was purely spiritual or psychological. Some say it was just the power of hope. Others argue it was divine intervention. Either way, the belief in that presence during fear became a cornerstone of strength. Now, I'm not saying you'll suddenly stop being afraid of the dark or never feel that anxious flutter in your stomach before a big presentation. But what I am saying is that you don't have to wrestle with that fear on your own. And that, my friend, is a game changer. In the next section, we're going to take a look at how this assurance has shown up in human history, from the battles of ancient times to the quiet moments where people turn to prayer for strength. You'll see how God's presence in history has always been there, even in the darkest times. Let's keep this momentum going, shall we? You've just realized that fear doesn't have to be faced alone, and now we're diving into the way God's presence has played a role in human history. You might think this is where we start pulling out ancient scriptures and grand divine proclamations, but hang tight. We're going to look at this through a lens that's just as much about the grit and grind of real human lives as it is about spiritual reassurance. History is littered with moments when people, whether kings or peasants, feared for their lives, their futures, or the world they knew. It doesn't matter whether the fear was born of an invading army, an illness that had no cure, or the quiet dread of a society teetering on the brink of collapse. The truth is, when it all goes wrong, when the world turns dark and uncertain, people start to reach for something bigger than themselves. Take the ancient Israelites, for example. They spent generations wandering the desert, afraid of what was next, unsure of what they would find. Imagine the fear they must have felt, literally lost with no end in sight, vulnerable to desert storms and hostile enemies. And yet, despite this, they carried with them a promise that God would never leave them. It's like they had an invisible guide, leading them through the roughest terrain, keeping them safe in the face of unimaginable odds. Historians still argue whether this presence was simply the strength of shared belief or divine intervention. But the fact remains that throughout the ages, people in fear have turned to a higher power, finding a reassurance in their belief that they are not truly alone. This sense of presence is a cornerstone in the faith traditions of many cultures, not just the Abrahamic religions, but also in indigenous practices, where gods or spirits were believed to watch over individuals, providing courage when needed most. During battles, when warriors faced certain death, the belief in a divine protector often turned the tide of what seemed like inevitable defeat. The Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE is one of those historical moments where you can almost feel the weight of fear and belief hanging in the air. The Greek army was vastly outnumbered by the Persians, but according to legend, just when hope seemed lost, the gods, specifically the goddess Athena, seemed to lend their power to the Greek forces. History may never confirm the exact details, but the soldiers swore they felt the gods with them in that desperate fight. Victory was snatched from the jaws of fear, and belief in divine presence became a powerful motivator to stand tall even in the face of death. If you look through different periods of history, the same themes emerge. Even in medieval Europe, where the Black Plague wreaked havoc, people turned to their faith in God as a source of strength. While some blamed their suffering on divine punishment, others sought comfort in the idea that God's presence would guide them through their darkest moments. Think of the countless saints, mystics, and everyday people who prayed, hoping for a sign, a whisper that assured them that they weren't walking this terrifying road alone. In those moments of fear, faith often found its strongest voice. And it wasn't just about blindly hoping for the best. It was about the deep, unshakable belief that fear could be faced with the help of a presence greater than any immediate crisis. The connection to something bigger than yourself isn't just a spiritual idea. It's been a survival strategy throughout history. People reached for something that grounded them when the earth felt like it was shifting beneath their feet. And yet, it's not all smooth sailing. In the midst of these dark chapters, there are always people who doubt, who question, who wonder whether they are truly being watched over or whether it's just an illusion. Historians still debate whether these moments of divine intervention were truly miraculous or if they were simply the product of sheer human will and determination. Some argue that belief itself is the most potent force in overcoming fear, while others insist that something more supernatural is at play. But even if you set aside the question of whether these events were miraculous, one thing is clear. Fear often brings us closer to God or to our understanding of something greater than ourselves. When you're at your lowest, when the world is at its darkest, you look for something to hold on to. That search, that reaching out, is what we call faith. And it has, time and time again, been the difference between surrender and survival. Now let's shift gears a little. When we return, we'll dig into the personal side of fear, particularly how people, in times of crisis, have drawn on their faith not only to survive, but to find courage. We'll see how God's presence doesn't just operate on a grand historical scale, but how it can be felt in the personal struggles of everyday life, especially in the most terrifying moments. All right, now we've covered the big picture moments in history, but what about when it's your turn to face fear? No armies, no grand battles, just you, alone in your thoughts, possibly on the verge of something that scares you. Maybe it's a new challenge at work, the uncertainty of your health, or an unexpected change that's out of your control. When the world is crumbling around you, it's easy to feel like God's presence is far away. But history shows us that even in the quiet personal crises, those smaller but just as real fears, we are not alone. One of the most powerful moments of personal courage in the face of fear comes from the stories of individuals who were utterly terrified but still found the strength to keep going. The fear didn't magically vanish, but the assurance of something greater, whether through faith or a sense of purpose, helped them push through. Take the example of Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch woman who, along with her family, hid Jews during World War II to protect them from the Nazis. Corrie's story is one of deep fear, as she had to face the reality of the war and the real possibility of death. But despite the constant terror she lived with, she wrote later that she always felt the presence of God with her in the darkest moments. Historians still argue whether it was sheer bravery or a deep spiritual connection that kept her going. Maybe it was both, but what stands out is her unshakable belief that she wasn't facing the danger on her own. Even when she was arrested and sent to a concentration camp, she experienced moments of peace that she attributed to the presence of God. That's not to say she didn't feel fear, far from it, but she had a profound sense that she was being carried through that fear, not abandoned in it. And it's not just during wartime that people find this kind of strength. Throughout history, we see everyday individuals battling their own demons and finding courage by leaning into faith. Whether it's a mother worried for her sick child or a young person preparing to face a life-changing test, we've all been in situations where the fear feels suffocating and we need something to hold on to. For many, this something is faith, a belief in a higher power that's present, even in the smallest of personal trials. But let's pause for a second and consider this. The fear in these personal stories isn't like the fear in the grand historical events. This is the fear that creeps up at night when you're lying in bed, wondering about the unknowns of your life. This is the kind of fear that sneaks up on you when you're about to walk into that meeting, or when you realize you've put off making that important phone call, or when something feels just off in your life. And in these moments, the presence of God isn't something that necessarily makes the fear go away. But it does give you something to hold on to, something that says, you're not facing this alone. In the midst of that quiet fear, you might find yourself praying or just silently asking for strength. You might not hear a voice or feel a physical touch, but it's like an invisible reassurance, a gentle whisper that you are seen and you are not alone in what you are facing. The cool part about this is that God's presence in these personal struggles can show up in the most unexpected ways. Maybe it's a timely message from a friend or a moment of clarity when you have been stuck in indecision. Maybe it's the calm that washes over you when you stop worrying for just a moment and remember that fear isn't the end of the story. This is something that people have shared throughout history as well. Those quiet, intimate moments where fear is met with unexpected courage. It's almost as if fear itself opens up a space for a deeper connection to the divine, one that's rooted not in grand gestures, but in simple moments of faith. People who have faced personal crises often describe feeling a presence with them, whether in a time of need or simply when the world felt too heavy. It's not about turning off the fear. It's about learning to move through it with the knowledge that you're being held, that you're not walking this path alone. Now, this brings us to something really fascinating, the science of fear. You might be thinking, what could science possibly have to say about the way I feel when I'm scared? Turns out a lot. But don't worry, I'm not going to start talking about neural pathways and adrenaline spikes. Instead, let's focus on how our brains react to fear and how this ties into the idea that we're not alone. Fear is a deeply physiological response. It's hardwired into us. When we're afraid, our brains go into overdrive, activating areas like the amygdala and the hypothalamus, which are responsible for processing fear and triggering the fight or flight response. But what's interesting is that our brains also release chemicals like oxytocin, which is known as the bonding hormone. It's the same hormone that plays a big role in the emotional connection between parents and children or between loved ones. In moments of fear, oxytocin can help soothe us, providing a sense of calm and reassurance. Now, some scientists believe that this response is linked to our social nature. Humans are wired to seek connection, and when we feel fear, we also feel a deep need for companionship. And here's where it gets juicy. Many people, whether consciously or not, interpret this need for companionship as a spiritual longing. The feeling that someone or something is there with us in our fear may actually be our brains working in tandem with our biology. Is that divine reassurance or just a biological response? Historians and psychologists still debate this one. But what we can say for sure is that the feeling of not being alone in our fear isn't just a nice idea. It's something our brains seem to be built to experience. Whether you believe it's a sign of a higher power or just the power of human connection, it's clear that fear is a moment where we're reminded of our deep need for support. And sometimes that support feels like it comes from something greater than ourselves. In the next section, we'll dig deeper into the science of fear and how this intricate dance between mind, body, and spirit might be the reason why we find such a profound connection when facing our deepest fears. Stay tuned, it's going to get fascinating. Now that we've walked through history and the deeply personal side of fear, it's time to zoom in on something you might find unexpectedly comforting. The science of fear itself. You may have never considered the mechanics behind your fear, but trust me, it's pretty fascinating. We're about to get into the nitty-gritty of how your body and brain react when fear strikes, and how that ties directly into the idea that you're never truly alone in those moments. Fear is a strange animal, isn't it? One minute you're walking down the street, feeling fine, and the next, boom, your heart races, your palms sweat, and suddenly you're in full-on panic mode. This isn't just a figment of your imagination. It's your body reacting to perceived danger, something that dates back to our prehistoric ancestors who needed to act fast to avoid becoming dinner for a saber-toothed tiger. The fight-or-flight response we talk about so often is your body's way of preparing to deal with that danger, whether it's real or imagined. But here's the kicker. It's not all just about survival instincts. Our fear responses are incredibly complex, and they often go beyond the immediate need for survival. When fear hits, our brain goes into hyperdrive, triggering parts of our nervous system that prepare us for battle or for running like the wind. In fact, one of the first areas activated in your brain when fear sets in is the amygdala. It's like the gatekeeper of your emotions, scanning for any signs of danger. The amygdala sends a signal to your hypothalamus, which is responsible for controlling things like your heart rate and the release of adrenaline. But here's where it gets interesting. Fear doesn't only pump you full of adrenaline, it can also trigger the release of oxytocin. Now, you might recognize oxytocin from its connection to love and bonding. This hormone is released when we connect with others, during moments of affection, or even when a mother is holding her newborn. But what many don't know is that oxytocin plays a huge role in reducing anxiety and fostering a sense of calm in stressful situations. Imagine that while fear is flooding your system, your brain is also releasing a hormone that can help ease your nerves. It's as though in the middle of your fear, there's a gentle reminder from your own body that you don't have to face this completely alone. Whether you see this as a biological response or as a divine reassurance is up to you. But the bottom line is the same. Fear triggers a system within you that is designed to help you cope, to help you push through the anxiety. Now the question becomes, why does our brain respond this way? Some psychologists argue that fear, in its rawest form, is about vulnerability. We're hardwired to feel fear when we perceive danger or uncertainty because as social creatures, we need to be aware of our surroundings to survive. But what if the reason we feel this deep, sometimes overwhelming need for connection during fear isn't just biological? What if that urge for support, for safety, for comfort is actually a subtle whisper that we're not in this alone? This is where things get even more interesting. Some scientists and spiritual thinkers believe that fear brings us to a point of vulnerability where we open ourselves up to something larger than just the physical world. It's like our biology is tuned to feel fear and simultaneously tuned to seek out connection. In moments of terror, our bodies become attuned to the idea that we're not meant to face this alone, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. So here's the fascinating thing. When we experience fear, our brains don't just tell us to fight or run. They also tell us to reach out, to bond, to connect with others. And this is where the spiritual side of things kicks in. Even if you're not actively praying in that moment, your brain might be subtly interpreting that need for connection as a spiritual yearning. You reach for God even without knowing it, because your body has been designed to understand that you're never truly alone in these moments. Whether it's through faith, through a supportive friend, or even through the comforting thought that you are being watched over, this deep need for connection during fear might be the most spiritual thing your body does. Historians still argue about the intersection of mind and spirit. Is fear purely a physiological reaction, or is it a profound spiritual experience that connects us with a higher power? Science points to the fact that our bodies are built for fear, but it's our response to it, how we interpret that fear, that truly shapes our experience. Some may say that our evolutionary wiring has shaped our brains to lean into faith during times of fear. Others argue that it's just the power of human will and our need for survival. Either way, the truth remains. In moments of fear, your body is giving you the tools to feel connected, to feel like you're not alone. That sense of connection, whether it's to a loved one or to something divine, is not a coincidence. It's part of your biological makeup. The fact that you find yourself reaching out for comfort when you're afraid, that's a deeper connection to the human experience, one that has existed since the beginning of time. As we move forward, let's explore how this deep sense of assurance, whether from within or from a higher power, manifests in our quietest, most intimate moments. The reassurance doesn't always come with a loud voice or a grand miracle. Sometimes it's simply a whisper in your soul, a reminder that fear doesn't have to be faced alone. All right, here we are, winding down in the quietest, most peaceful part of our journey. You've traveled with me through the terrifying unknowns of history, faced your own fears, explored the science of how we experience fear, and even discovered the surprising ways your body whispers to you in moments of panic. Now let's bring this all together and talk about the final part of the puzzle. How, in the stillness of the night, in those moments when you feel most alone, you can trust that God's assurance is silently working within you. We're all familiar with that quiet, lingering fear that creeps up on you when the lights go out. You lie in bed, heart racing, unable to shake that feeling of isolation. Maybe it's the hum of your own thoughts, the what-ifs spinning out of control, or the overwhelming sense of not knowing what the future holds. But it's in this moment of fear, right here, in the silence, that you are not abandoned. You see, fear, while loud and terrifying, often has a way of bringing us closer to something greater. It's when we're at our lowest, when we feel most vulnerable, that we begin to look for reassurance, for guidance, for something to hold on to. And in those moments, whether you are consciously aware of it or not, God is right there. Not always in the way you expect, but in ways that speak directly to the heart. Take a deep breath for a moment. Let the silence settle in. Notice how you're breathing, slower, deeper now. That's your body, gently telling you it's okay to stop and listen. And in that moment of stillness, when your body has calmed and your mind has quieted, you might hear the faintest whisper of peace. It's not the loud, overwhelming presence you may have imagined, but it's a subtle reassurance that you're not alone in the dark. Maybe it's the comforting thought that you've survived before, or the tiny flicker of hope that tomorrow will bring something better. It might even come in the form of a prayer you didn't mean to say, or a word of comfort from someone who unexpectedly reaches out. Throughout history, countless individuals have found strength in these silent moments. When their fears were at their peak, when they were alone and vulnerable, many found that God's presence was strongest in their quietest moments. Think of the mystics of the Middle Ages, who often sought solitude in prayer, away from the noise and distractions of daily life. They too faced fear, fear of the unknown, fear of their own inadequacy, and fear of what might come after death. And yet, in that stillness, they found the closest connection to God. It wasn't the chaos of the battlefield or the desperation of a dire crisis that led them to feel God's presence. It was the silence. Historians and theologians often debate whether this deep sense of divine assurance is the product of human psychology or something much greater. Some argue it's a mental mechanism, a coping strategy our brains are wired for, designed to make us feel less alone in times of fear. Others believe it's something spiritual, a manifestation of God's constant presence in our lives, whether we're aware of it or not. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between. The stillness, the quiet whisper that settles over you, is a gift, a reassurance that even when the world around you feels uncertain, you have a steady source of comfort, a constant presence guiding you forward. But let's not sugarcoat it. Fear doesn't go away just because you feel reassured for a moment. You will still face those times when fear grips you, when it paralyzes you. But the difference now is that you know you're not facing it alone. Whether it's the quiet assurance of your own belief or the unspoken presence of a higher power, you have something to rely on in the darkest moments. And as you lie there on the edge of sleep, drifting between wakefulness and the quiet peace of night, you might realize that fear no longer has the same hold on you. You've learned to move through it, to let it wash over you, to sit with it without being consumed by it. Fear doesn't define you. It's simply a part of the human experience, something that comes and goes like waves on the shore. And just like those waves, you don't need to fight them. You can let them come knowing that you'll be carried through. As the night deepens, remember this: even when you feel most alone, even when fear seems insurmountable, God's assurance is quietly working within you. It doesn't always come with a loud voice or a grand miracle. Sometimes it's the softest whisper in your soul, reminding you that you are seen, you are heard, and you are never truly alone. Now let your body sink into the bed, feel the weight of the world lift off your shoulders, and know that in the quietest moments of fear, you are safe. There's no need to fight, no need to run. Just breathe and let the peace of God settle over you.